The casting couch has become synonymous in Hollywood, with entertainment execs sexually exploiting up-and-coming actors in exchange for career-changing roles in television and film. But this isn't always how things work, as proven by Joel Thurm, one of the most admired, powerful, and accomplished casting directors to have ever worked the job. His credits read like a best of TV and film list from the 1970s and 80s, including Grease, Airplane, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, Taxi, Cheers, Love Boat, Fantasy Island, and The Cosby Show. And he's just written a book on his remarkable career in life. It's called Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season: Confessions of a Casting Director. Joel, thank you for the time. How you doing today?
So far, okay. It's rainy. I've only had one cup of coffee, but I'm doing okay for that.
I'm on one cup right now, too. Hopefully cup two comes a little bit later on. So this was such an interesting book to get to read from somebody who is one of the all-time great casting directors in Hollywood. And you have plenty of skins on the wall in TV and movies as well. So I can't wait to get into some of that. And interestingly, there is a pretty well-known connection to you actually writing this book to begin with. So how did Joaquin Phoenix influence your writing of this book?
Well, he suggested well, first of all, I've known Joaquin since he was 8 years old or 7. His mother was my secretary at NBC for 5 years. And I started, he and his brother, in fact, the whole family, I sent them to an agent because the family had moved to California to get into showbiz. So, and obviously he and his brother, River, had great success. But I was having dinner with Joaquin and his mother at Joaquin's house. And this one, when he was already a movie star, but a lesser one. He was starring in a lot of quirky individual movies. And his mother and I, after 14 glasses of wine and maybe a joint that appeared from my pocket that he didn't partake of, his mother and I started, just trading war stories from NBC. And he started laughing at all this. And of course, he didn't know them because he was 8 years old at the time. And afterwards, he said, "Man, you got to write this shit down." And fortunately, he only lives 5 minutes away. So I live in Laurel Canyon, so I didn't even have to put the gas on. I just had to roll down the hill safely. And I literally started, and I wrote 2/3 of my first chapter because the minute he said that, the title popped into my head, which is a really good title. And I wrote the first 2 chapters of my David Hasselhoff story because I just very clearly, I knew that I could do that. I didn't have to look anything up. I could just write. So that's
right. You bear responsibility for David Hasselhoff. It's a fascinating story, beginning his soap career and going all the way through Baywatch too. It's a really cool story.
But
I'm not going to ask you about that one though, because there's certain stories here that I need to point people to the book for. What I do want to ask you about though is your whimsical, crazy life really began in childhood. You grew up on a farm in Brooklyn, just a couple blocks away from a train stop. As odd as that may be for people to consider right now, what was that like, and how did it shape you as a person?
Well, it shaped me as a person. I was a non-athletic kid. I wasn't a sissy, but I was just not athletic. I still have no hand-eye coordination when it comes to handling a ball. I can't dribble. I throw like a girl. If you're catching, I'll go like that, so. But I got street cred because my grandfather had a farm, and I could take kids to my grandfather's farm. Now, this was a part of Brooklyn that's about as far away from Manhattan as you can get. It was Southeast Brooklyn, which means close to a body of water called Jamaica Bay. And it was an area that wasn't very built up. I mean, the biggest apartment building might have been 3 stories. So it was, and my grandfather's farm at that time wasn't the only farm. There was one other one and much bigger. And my grandfather's brother-in-law had an even bigger farm in Queens. And between them, they cornered, and don't laugh, the kosher milk business in Brooklyn and Queens. And you're saying to yourself, what is kosher milk? What's the difference? It costs 2 cents more per quart, and you hire a rabbi to come in and wave his magic wand and certify the cows didn't eat pork. That's kosher milk.
Do cows ever eat pork?
Well, obviously he didn't think so then, but X number of years ago, remember there was a mad cow disease scare,
Mhm.
and you found out that there was ground meat products in the feed that cows were eating. So it's totally possible that cows would have eaten pork. I'm not saying they did, but it was possible.
It is deplorable what is happening to what's being fed to animals that are a part of this food supply in this country. We won't get into that conversation right now.
I also thought it was pathetic because the barn that they were in was an absolutely beautiful red brick Victorian building. The cows were like chained like on a slave ship, in stanchions that went from there. They were in shackles, and there was a trough in the front, not a trough in the front. You put the bucket of feed, and in the back there was a trough for their manure, and the manure would be shoved looking at it to the left into an outdoor manure box. And I guess, someone would come every once in a while and collect the manure and pay for it because it was valuable. So, but it came equipped with a haystack, which I set on fire many times because it was fun, but always put it out. But it gave me unique status in my neighborhood. So I loved it.
So did you ever have to actually milk the cows then?
I tried once, and I didn't want to do it. And I tasted raw milk right out of the udder. No, I didn't lick the udder, but in a glass, and it was disgusting. So no, never a chance of doing it again. But that was what my grandfather did in Europe. He was a farmer. And in Europe, because where they lived, Jews were not allowed to own property.
Hmm.
So he and his family that emigrated were allowed to buy plots of land because this was here where, Jews and everybody else could buy things. And because they came from either Poland or Russia, whatever, and the border changed constantly. So, but that's what they did. So I had 3 relatives who were in the milk business.
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm a mutt at this point, but I'm more Armenian than anything else. And my Armenian family had to escape genocide in Turkey in the early 1900s. And they came to America, and they did the exact same thing. I think they started on the East Coast, but eventually made their way out to California, to the Bakersfield area, and bought farms so that they could be self-sustained and also make a living as well, helping to sell off some of that which they could not use.
Yeah, well, that's basically what happened. Although this was just a dairy farm. It was on about the size of a New York City block, about a third of a New York City block. Mm. And there was a whole open space behind the buildings. I mean, there was the house where my grandmother and grandfather lived. There was the bunkhouse where the winos / milkers lived. No, my grandfather would go down to the Bowery, pick up guys, pay them in cash and whiskey to do the actual milking. And it's the one place, usually when someone tells me not to do something, of course I'm going to run and do it. But I was told to stay away from the bunkhouse. And I did, because if you got within 6 feet of it, the smell was like it would drive you back. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that was it. Yeah.
No, it's really cool. All right, moving on now to what really was the start of your career as somebody who did an exquisite job putting people in roles on stage and eventually on television and film as well. Who was David Merrick, and why is he such an important figure in your casting career?
Well, David Merrick was the most important Broadway producer. And when I say Broadway, that includes national companies of musicals musicals and straight plays and comedies that started in New York. For a 10-year period, he was it. I mean, that was the ne plus ultra, the Tiffany, the Cartier of producers. And he was I think it is what he was a very colorful character, although he only dressed in black, pinstripe, and gray, and had a jet black toupee and a mustache that was dyed jet black as well. But he was a genius when it came to picking projects. He had great taste. And he loved being a character. I mean, he enhanced his own character. I mean, he said things. It's not only that I should succeed, but others should fail. I worked my way up, and I started my first job in show business. I was a box office treasurer. And then I helped build an off-Broadway theater because I could use power tools. A lot of people can't. And and you meet people, and then you meet a guy who likes you and thinks you have potential. And he said, "Oh, there's a job open at so and so. Do you want to interview for it?" And I say, "Sure." So that happened twice, and the second one was for the job at David Merrick's office, and it was a business job. It wasn't a creative job. But I was smart enough to know, hey, get yourself in the office, just get in there, and then let things go. And they did. To continue the story, I was working for this guy, Merrick's hatchet man, his general manager, who was even more notorious than Merrick. He carried out all of Merrick's orders. He was the evil prime minister. And Jack was, Jack would threaten and then follow through on his threats. And I was his assistant, but I'm not like that. I couldn't do it. But he really wanted a mini me as his secretary / assistant. So one day he would buzz, "Get in here." I went in his office and he says, "Look, I can't stand working with you anymore. So you got a choice." He said, "You can go work with Biff." And this was a man named Biff Liff, Samuel quotations Biff Liff, who later became one of the most important theater agents for William Morris. At that time, he was in charge of production as opposed to business. So Jack said, "You can go work with Biff. You can become our casting director, reopen our casting department. You'll get a $50 a week raise, or you're fired." And I said, "Well, I think I'll work with Biff." That was my choice. But I said to Jack, "I don't know anything about casting." And he said, "Yes, you do. You just don't know you do." I mean, that's how perceptive this guy was, based on conversations that we would have before I got to work. I mean, I got to work at 9:30. Work began at 10, and I'd bring it. There was no Mr. Coffee at that time in your office. So I'd bring up coffee and bagels from the corner, and we'd sit there and talk. And he was intuitive enough to know that, based on our discussions, that, his intuition was right. So that's how it happened. So that's why David Merrick is important in my life.
So you were talking about the plays of the moment, and you were hypothesizing individuals, actors that were known in the community who might do a good or better job than the person who was currently in that role. Was that the gist of a lot of those conversations?
Well, that was part of it, but the other ones, I saw this movie last night. It was great. I would talk about whatever I'd seen the night before, but I think what must have stuck in his head, we had a show running called Cactus Flower. And the star was Lauren Bacall, but there was also a woman supporting role who became a big star named Brenda Vaccaro. Out of that, she became a star because of that part. But her contract was up, and we knew she was going to be leaving at a certain point. And I remember having a conversation with Brenda's understudy went on last night, and I went to see it. And I said, she got every laugh. So when Brenda leaves, why don't we just put her in the role, and she'll be a lot cheaper. And I think the thing he heard more than everything else was the word cheaper. So I think that cemented it. And, that's how it happened.
While working this job, you met the legendary actor Pearl Bailey. How did she really help take your career to that next major step?
Pearl is the whole reason that we're talking. My mother was fascinated with show business. And as an early kid, I learned of the only two nationally known Black actresses, Lena Horne and Pearl Bailey. And my mother was in awe of show business. Something that she could never do. And, if we were lucky, they went to two Broadway shows a year, and I would pore over the programs. But I knew who Pearl Bailey and Lena Horne were. So my job when I got to Merrick, in addition to being Jack's assistant and office slave, at night, I became the company manager of Pearl Bailey Hello Dolly. And the company manager is the one who makes sure the box office's receipts are all right and handles all the backstage little squabbles. But Jack took me back to meet Pearl that night. And there was something instant that happened, and she really took to me. I think part of it was because her family was back in California and she was in New York all alone. And I'm a 19, 20-year-old kid. I don't know exactly, I think 20 at that point. And she invited me to dinner that night. And so after the show, I went backstage, waited till she changed. Then we walked down to Sardi's, which was 6 doors down the street. That was the Joe Allen's of the time, only a little more expensive. And, we sat in the best location. And that's when I learned how to be celebrity adjacent, because I'd sit next to her and people came to the table to tell her they just saw her, how wonderful she was. And she would always say, and this is Joel Thurm from the Merrick office. And of course, they couldn't care less. But I didn't mind the fact that they didn't care less, because I was sitting with Pearl and having a great time and having experiences that I never would have had I continued my family's plan for me, which was to become either a doctor, lawyer, dentist, teacher, or accountant. So to me, this was a wonderful world that opened to me, and I loved it, and I loved her. And what I would do is, even though it made no sense for me to do it, because part of her deal was to get a limo to and from the theater, and she lived on the Upper East Side. I lived 2 subway stops down in the village, which is 10 minutes away. But I would sit with her in her car, drive home with her, and then the limo would take me to my house. And we would talk and just, she had no family here in New York. So we connected. And one day she said, don't tell anybody, but ABC wants me to do a variety show for them. Do you want to work on it? Do you want to come to California and work on it? And I said, why not? So when I say Pearl is the reason I'm here, that's the reason. And by the way, the variety show was dead on arrival. I didn't do my homework because it was a very old-fashioned variety show. And, Laugh-In had already been on the air, and old-fashioned variety shows, Perry Como, blah, 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 were passe. But that got me to California.
It did get you out to California, and between gigs, I guess, on the entertainment side of things, or the movie and TV side of things, you did mind the gap by serving as the production manager for the Greek and Hartford theaters in LA. But eventually you do get that big break as a casting director. What do LSD, the puffy shirt from Seinfeld, and a superstar have to do with you catching that first major break?
On the way to Merrick, I started working for Music Fairs, which was a series of mostly outdoor musical tents in the summer. And Westbury Music Fair had already become a hardtop. So my boss there at Music Fairs was a guy who was only a year and a half older than me, named Brian Avnet. And Brian Avnet moved to LA, and he was a member of the union ATPAM, the Company Managers Union. So he moved to California, became a general manager, because the only ones that were in LA then were like 90 years old. Brian was a young and vital guy. And when I got there, he was a casting director, and he turned to me. Any project that he was general manager of, he said, "You're going to cast it." He never said that, but he always gave me the job. So one of his gigs was going to be a national company of Jesus Christ Superstar. This one was Teddy Neely and Carl Anderson. I did not know that they were going to be doing the movie later on. I just, cast them to do that. But Brian asked me to take his wonderful wife, Maria. Maria was Sofia Vergara, only a little less. She was this wonderful va-va-va-boom Cuban woman who, oddly enough, her job was writing the little blurbs in TV Guide, and lived right down the street from me. And when I got to Maria's house to take her, she said, "Do you want to do some blotter?" And I had no idea what blotter was. And I said, "Well, yeah, why not? I would do anything once, except inject. I would never do anything under the skin." And so I did that. And after I did, we said, "Well, it's acid. It's light acid." Now, the outfit that I choose to wear, remember, it's late 60s, and starting at the bottom, wonderful cowboy boots that you would have appreciated with silver tips, brown sort of tan suede bell bottoms, a pirate shirt that Errol Flynn had worn in some movie that I bought at the MGM auction when they were getting rid of all their props. And there wasn't a jacket. That was it, which was enough. So those are the 3 things that you named. And I go with Maria, and just like all of a sudden the acid hits. And the funny part was, I was seated between 2 prospective employers. There's me, and then there's Maria. And on one side of Maria is a man named Norman Lloyd, who you may know from being an actor on St. Elsewhere. He was also a producer and was considering me to cast a TV movie. And the other side was this woman, Ethel Winant, who was head of casting for CBS, and a very, very important person. I was considering adding me to her staff because of my recent New York experience. So here I am on acid between two prospective employers. And obviously, I didn't embarrass myself. I just sat there with a shit-eating grin on my face all night, and then it wore off. So that's the story.
Jesus Christ Superstar is a pretty wild production on its own. Did being on acid make it better or worse?
I had nothing to compare it to. I don't know, but I think probably made it better because it was outdoors. This was at the Universal Amphitheater, and the stage, and I forgot who the design, well, the director was Tom O'Horgan, who I'd actually met years before because of my off-Broadway work at the Cafe Chino. So by this time, Tom was a big director star because he directed Hair. And the stage consisted of two arms, like one arm like that and one arm like this, that pivoted and turned around that people could walk on and stand. And the other one was JC's head, you know, with his face pointing up. An incredible stage, and it was outdoors, and you know, it was in San Fernando Valley in the summer, and you know, it was kind of wonderful. So it was great. So I think the acid did increase it a lot.
So you end up at CBS with Ethel as your boss, and you write that she was a genius at recognizing talent and manipulating the network's all-male execs on both coasts. Now, remember, this is, I want to say, the early 1970s at this time. What was the most important lesson that you learned from her about casting?
You can't learn taste. You have to have that. But it was how to handle people. Ethel was a genius at that. And this is, I think, why there were so many originally women casting directors. Because women knew how to manipulate men. They knew how to manipulate the suits. And invariably, they were always men. And there was no competition. There was no dick size competition. There was none of that. But, you know, that was it. And I'll go into it, how she single-handedly, without any help, cast the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The first one. The executives at CBS did not like the Mary Tyler Moore Show. They did not want to do it. But Ethel became friends with one of the writers, Alan Burns. And she said, I read this. It's brilliant. Everybody here hates this, but I will work on this with you quietly. And one by one, she cast every single role on that. The last role to be cast was Rhoda. And Rhoda Valerie got the job because she happened to be in LA as part of a group that was performing downtown at the Music Center called Story Theater, an improv group that started in Chicago. And that's when Valerie came from. But otherwise, Ethel knew Ed Asner, but she knew him as a dramatic actor when she was casting live drama in New York. But she also knew Ed personally and knew that Ed could be funny. You know, so one by one, that's how she did that. And I learned tremendous things from her. I also learned from Ethel on a quiet afternoon. Nothing was going on. And we were all sitting around, and Ethel looked at the group. There were 4 of us, maybe 5. And she said, you guys don't realize how lucky you are. You enjoy coming to work every day. Do you know how many people in America hate going to work every day? And you get to meet and interact with celebrities that you've only dreamed of meeting. And she went on like that. And I never, ever forgot how lucky I was. And she was right.
Your TV projects during your time at CBS included the Bob Newhart Show, and then something that I'd never heard of before, but it sounds like a really good show called The Minutes. What was The Minutes, and why were you so proud of this show?
Well, first of all, the Bob Newhart Show was the first thing that I cast at CBS. I didn't do the pilot, but I did everything else after that, the group therapy group, all of that. And the Bob Newhart Show was always Mary Tyler Moore's, stepbrother. They were always listed together, but Mary was over here, Newhart was over here. But I didn't mind that. Then there was something called the Bicentennial Minutes, which was on the air for 2 years at CBS. I think it was on at 8 o'clock every night in prime time. There was 1 minute that was devoted to the upcoming bicentennial, which means it started in 74. A lot of people made fun of this later on, but it was someone would come on and they said, on January 1st in 1974, Peter blah 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 went out in the woods, chopped down a cherry tree, and blah 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 blah, and that's the way it was, using Walter Cronkite's sign off, and that's the way it was. So Ethel knew, and I knew at that time, that while I liked casting, my ambitions was to go beyond casting and do other things. So what this allowed me to do was, first I would find the appropriate person for the minute. And then once we were in the studio, I worked with a director, but he was a technical director. So he was only concerned with, the moving in and out and the framing and all of that. But it was up to me, if the star or whoever it was reading the material, saying, I don't feel comfortable saying that. How could we rephrase this? And then I would rewrite it with them on the spot. Or that the director would say, well, we're too long, we have to cut. I would do that. And this gave me the opportunity to expand and, do things like with no supervision and no training. And I shouldn't say no training, because I watched what Ethel did for the pilots, if you will, for the minutes. Ethel dragged in a couple of her well-known friends like Paul Newman, Ed Asner, and Cloris Leachman to do some of the minutes. And I watched the process. And she trusted me with doing it. And I loved the freedom of doing it. It was just great. Charlton Heston was one of my favorites, by the way.
Why is that?
Well, first of all, I would meet people at the artist entrance. He goes in, and this is during there was a gas shortage when OPEC did this, and he sees me, and he throws me the keys to his car, and he said, "Could you fill her up, please?" He did, and he just thought I was like a page or something, and I did. First of all, I ruined his gear shift because it was a stick shift, a black Corvette, very dirty inside, by the way. And but filled it up, came back, and I go into the studio, and he had no idea that I was going to be the one directing and supervising this minute. And he kind of laughed and apologized, about it for it. And I said, hey, no problem. You got your gas and you're here. So it was just, and at that time, a little bit of his conservative background was beginning to bubble up, but he was nothing but wonderful. So in my little experience with him.
So you didn't find any guns in the glove box then?
I didn't look. Maybe they were there, but I didn't look.
I'm glad that he showed a little bit of modesty to not only be able to laugh about the situation, but also to apologize to you. Because I'm sure there's people in that business who wouldn't even think to begin to apologize. They would just move on to the next thing.
Exactly. No, it's yeah. And it's interesting. It's you judge people very often by how they treat the little people.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to argue and bitch and complain to the people on your level, but when you start doing that to the little people, you've stepped over a line. So, and I've always observed that, and when I was in the position of getting back at those people, I did.
I love to hear that. That's a great piece of advice too, by the way. Now, Ethel eventually allows you to take part in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, first in theater, and then eventually what became the cult classic movie. While the film included Tim Curry and most of the original London theatrical cast, plus Meatloaf, you got to cast two parts, the American characters Brad and his fiancée Janet. Why was Susan Sarandon the only actor you really had in mind to play Janet? Because, boy, you nailed that one.
Well, I had used Susan before in a few other things. At CBS, we did a miniseries about Benjamin Franklin, and she played the Beau Bridges and Lloyd Bridges with the younger Ben and the older Ben in the first episode. And the older woman was a woman named Sherry North, which sounds like a big, glamour-puss name. And she was of that era, but she was a sensational actress, and she had these eyes that were this size. So when it came to casting her younger part, Susan Sarandon with those eyes. But I also knew Susan. I forgot how I met both Susan and her husband, Chris Sarandon, just through stuff in New York. But I knew that Susan could go from virgin to slut in less than 30 seconds. That was in her wheelhouse. It still is, by the way. But so that's how I just that's how I zoned in on her. And I guess when I first moved to Cali in the early years, have a lot of dinner parties. I would invite people over. I was a fairly decent cook, and at one of these, I invited Susan and Chris, her then husband, and Barry Bostwick. Of course, Barry's manager, Bob Lamont, was my best friend at the time. And at this dinner, I didn't know it while it was happening, but Susan and Barry locked the eyes, and Susan's marriage was already on the rocks. And a couple of days later, she and Barry were a couple. Your question was, how did I zero in on her for that? I just knew. I knew that she was right for it. And I knew that she could sing a little bit. So and we did have audition. There was Lou Adler, who produced, did all of this, who gobbled up the rights to Rocky Horror, was a music producer, and he had a woman that he had in mind. The name was Abigail Hannis, who was an incredible singer, but she wasn't an actress. So Susan wasn't the only one who auditioned, but it was obvious when Susan and Barry were on stage together that was it. But this is what I got paid for, was knowing these things and having an instinct.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like you operate not just on your intuition, because obviously there's the experience there too, but you are very savvy in understanding when your intuition is going off as to a person that belongs in a particular role. And there are plenty of other examples that we're going to continue to talk about here. But you move on from CBS to Spelling Goldberg Productions. Yes. And on the 20th Century Fox movie studio lot. The projects that you worked on during this time, Joel, it's incredible. If one person had this on their resume, it would be a career's worth of shows. But this was one stretch of your life and your career. Starsky and Hutch, Charlie's Angels, The Love Boat, Fantasy Island, and The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, to name more than a few. But before we get into some of these shows, why were Aaron Spelling and Leonard Goldberg such a good team with this production company when it was at its peak?
They were geniuses because they were yin and yang. I don't know which was which, but they totally complemented each other. I was in awe of this. It was the first time that I went to see rough cuts, when I went to see film dailies. I didn't do any of that at CBS, really. So let's take a rough cut of an episode of Starsky and Hutch. I would go to it, and Aaron and Len would be there. First, one of them would get up after the piece and talk to the people in the room, who was the editor, me, all the people necessary to finish it. And they would critique it. Beautifully succinct comments. And then let's say Aaron got up first. Len would then get up and finish all the other things that needed to be fixed or done to it. They perfectly complemented each other, perfectly. Len was the more serious one. Len always had and he did eventually want to go into feature films. Aaron loved television, and he loved what I call bread and butter television. He wasn't interested in winning Emmys. He was interested in winning eyeballs and giving the people what they want. Len aspired to a little higher. So I had both of them to learn from. That's why it was so great. And then along comes, we'll talk about Boy in the Plastic Bubble when you want me to, but that's how I got to do that.
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that, because you say that this is the TV movie that really changed your life. Why?
Well, it changed my life because I produced a movie, and I didn't know how to produce a movie, but I produced a movie. Not only did I produce a movie, but I put the whole package together without knowing I was putting a package together. There was a woman who developed scripts for Spelling Goldberg. Her name was Cindy Dunn. By the way, her father was the president of ABC, so she got the job through nepotism, but she delivered in her job. She was great. One Friday afternoon, she comes into my office looking very sad, holding a script, and she said, ABC just turned down my favorite script that I've been developing for 2 years. She said, the only way they'll do it is if we can get a big star in it. Otherwise, they're passing. And she said, can you do me a favor and please read this script? I said, Cindy, it's not a favor. That's my job. So which she laughed. And I took the script home. It was a Friday. Saturday, I'll try to make it fast. I had a reading ritual with another friend named Bob Lamont, who I mentioned earlier, who was a top talent manager. And I say we would lie on my deck, getting melanoma, reading scripts. And Bob had a client who suddenly hit that year named John Travolta. And even though John's name ends in a vowel and he's from New Jersey, he is not his name. But he was playing that character on Welcome Back, Kotter, Vinnie Barbarino. And John wanted desperately to let the world know that he wasn't Vinnie Barbarino. But he had only a month to do something before he had to go back to Kotter. So I read the Boy in the Plastic Bubble script. And when I finished it, I throw it over to Bob. I said, John could do this in less than a month. I mean, I said other things, but essentially that's what I said. He goes home and he reads it. He said, I love this. I'm giving it to John. That's a Saturday night. Sunday night, by Sunday night, John had read the script and said, I want to do it. So Monday morning, I go in and I announced Cindy. I said, you think John Travolta is a big enough name? And she said, you're kidding. I said, no, I'm not kidding. And then we call Aaron and Len, who don't believe me. He wants to do this. Why does he want, it's like, why, if someone wants to do it, why am I asking why, And then when they called ABC, and the head of it then was a guy named Mike Eisner said, well, why does he want to do this? We've thrown everything else at him. Why does he want to do this? That same question. And it only became real when ABC made John an offer. They made a cash offer of $25,000. And John countered and got $75,000. But you only know something is real when cash is on the line. And then I had suggested, because I had a friend, a guy named Randall Kleiser, who I'd met at a party. He was in his last year at USC and his master's thesis, and he asked me for help casting his master's thesis at USC, which I did. And because I read the piece and I thought it was wonderful. That master's thesis went on to be aired on NBC for the next 10 years after he did it. It was a brilliant story about a boy, a college-age guy, i.e. Randall, visiting his grandmother in a nursing home and revisiting pleasant times in their life, because now she had Alzheimer's. The word didn't exist at that time. And I said, my God, this is incredible. And I cast it. And Randall had gotten a couple of other TV gigs at that point. And I said, and I had previously suggested Randall to cast some episodes of Spelling Goldberg shows. And he did. The cast loved him and he was on time and budget. And so I said, and I'd like to do this, and I'd like Randall Kleiser to cast to direct this. And they said, great. So between Wednesday and Friday, I had a movie to produce. And I said, and Cindy and I want to produce the movie. And they said, fine. And we started doing, again, I didn't know what I was doing, but I just did things that you do. I can't explain it. And Cindy and I, we weren't expecting any extra money because we were being paid year round by Spelling Goldberg. But I said, we definitely want credit as producers. And we got a definite maybe. So we did it. And I think you probably know this from the book, but afterwards, when they saw the rough cut and I was home working on my house, lying in the bathtub with a joint and a glass of wine and a very long cord on the phone. And Leonard, I forget who calls first. It probably was Aaron, and said, we love the project. You did a great job and you're going to get producer credit. But I had to fight Len. He was against it. Monday morning, I go into the office and I get a call from Len. You did a great job. We love the movie and you're going to get producer credit, but I had to fight Aaron for that.
Hilarious.
So, anyway, so that's the Boy in the Plaid. But again, all of the previous knowledge that I had built up, watching Ethel, doing bicentennial minutes, doing this, doing that, that's how you learn. It just, you learn how to do it.
Yeah, I enjoyed this book for so many different reasons. A ton of great stories, some of which you've already been nice enough to tell on this podcast, but you're also dropping little philosophical nuggets throughout the book as well. For instance, one of my favorite lines is, quote, "To this day, I believe the less money you have on a project, or the less money you have for a project, the more it forces the creative folk to be inventive and clever. Why is the original film production of Grease, which you were an instrumental part of, such a good example of this?"
Well, I'll give you one very good example, but I wrote that because of my experience when I produced the movie Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
Hmm.
And I wish we had less money. We had a $10 million budget. I wish we had a five.
Hmm.
But going back to Greece, fortunately, the best thing that happened to Greece was the genius promoter guy who put it all together, Alan Carr, was sick through most of the production, and with a tummy tuck where they staple your stomach so you lose weight, and he wasn't around, and I filled in for all the producer things he should have done. But the best example is Randall Kleiser comes over, the director, one day, and he says, "Oh God, we found out we can't go to Magic Mountain for the finale." And I said, "Why are you looking so sad? That's great. We shouldn't be at Magic Mountain in the first place. We should have a little dinky carnival that winds up in schools and churches." And I was right. I don't know how much money that saved. It saved a lot of money, but it was the right thing for the movie to do. Another example was he didn't have time to actually photographically cover Olivia Newton-John singing the Sandra Dee reprise, where she decides she's going to become Slutty Sandy. And I said, you don't need it. You don't have to cover her. We're in the river. You're shooting up. You see her. Zoom in on her, and she'll do the song as a voiceover. Why does she have to record? Why do you have to record her seeing her singing it? So it's things like that where you don't have enough money, you get creative.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that final scene in Greece with Slutty Sandy, because Olivia Newton-John coming out in that skin-tight, all-black outfit at the end of the film is one of those scenes that's going to live on to the end of time. So
absolutely.
What was it like to watch that play out in person?
I was literally there. For whatever reason, that day, I was there in front of her dressing room. When she came out, no one had seen the hair. No one had seen anything. None of us had seen anything. The costume, what I found out only after the fact was Albert Wolski, great costume designer who doesn't get mentioned nearly enough for the costumes he did on Grease. Olivia walks out with the hair on the side, and she sees me, and she's kind of laughing and winking and preening and kind of showing off. And Albert is following her because he's right behind her, because she's attached by a needle and thread. He's sewing her into the back. He had to sew her, I found out later, because there was no zipper. He bought this at a used clothing store. So I was there when she came out, and it was like, I was just laughing. And, Olivia, I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry for your loss, Joel.
Not only was she an absolutely beautiful woman, she was also an incredibly smart woman. And she had a great sense of humor and self-deprecation. So she had fun dressing up and doing that. And you could see the joy that she had stepping out in that outfit. And, the cigarette, tell me about it, stud. I mean, excuse me. No, I'll get over it. But, it comes over me in waves when it comes to talking about her. Because I went on to produce a movie with her called It's My Party. Mm-hmm. And we had to cut some incredible dramatic work that she did in that movie. Mm-hmm. And we just had to cut it for time, but she was brilliant. I mean, she could do anything she wanted to. I mean, and on top of that, she was just a wonderful person. So I just get teary-eyed.
You and many of the Grease team, including John and Olivia, end up getting back together several years ago to do some live performances. I think this was pre-COVID, back in 2019, maybe.
December of 19, right pre-COVID. It was an absolutely wonderful, wonderful time of my life. It was sensational.
I'm guessing you're especially glad about that now, because it gave you one more chance to be around your close friends.
Well, it did that, but it also, one of my problems with Grease was I had no portfolio beyond casting it.
Yeah.
Randall Kleiser, I promised him I would be on the set every day, because he knew not. I had seen Grease 6 times off Broadway. Bob Lamont, again, this I mentioned him a few times. All of his clients were in it: Barry Bostwick, Carol Demas, Jeff Conaway. So I knew Grease in and out. He didn't. And he wasn't. My joke is he not only wasn't he a musical comedy queen, he wasn't even a lady in waiting. He just didn't know, and I did. And he didn't want to take the job. He would have taken it, but he said, "If I take it, will you promise to be on the set every day?" And I was, but I had no authority, and that's a very odd position to be in. However, when it came to Greece, Florida, things had changed completely. By that time, word had gotten out on exactly what I did, beyond the fact of casting. But my job was to write the phony audience questions during the Q&As after there was a screening of, first of all, there was I don't know why the girls weren't there, the Pink Ladies, but the T-Birds were, now 40 years later. But they came out, did their shtick, and then Randall Kleiser would come out, introduce the movie, the screen would come down, you'd watch the movie, and then we'd have our lunch dinner, and then as the screen was rising, John and Olivia would walk out in their costumes, looking fantastic, even though it was a wig on John. It was fantastic. And the audience would go crazy. It was the Beatles reunion. And I got to, and I really had a job. My job was to make sure that if there weren't good enough questions from the audience, I had the phony, I always had a question about Olivia's health, which I knew she wanted to talk about, her cancer. But there was always a woman in the audience who asked that question, but I was prepared in case not. But I threw in funny questions to get reactions, like, "Are you guys interested in a threesome?" And John and Olivia liked throwing things at that. John more than Olivia. Olivia was good at if you gave her a little idea of what was coming. And very quickly, they took a moment to laugh. And then Olivia said, "We're already in one." And they pointed to the 3 T-Birds on stage. So I had so much fun then. And, just got to spend more time with John and Olivia as people, as friends. And we were going to do that cross country if it wasn't for, these were tests to do it. John always wants to make as much money as he can. So, and the tickets went from, I think, $50 to $1,000 or $1,500. $1,500 got you a minute of a photograph with John and Olivia and a cheesy little gym bag. So yeah, that was it. Life interferes.
What did you love about working on Taxi?
Well, I loved working on Taxi because of the script.
Yeah.
You get a script and you look at that and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to cast these great words. I must say, backing it up, the hardest thing to do, and believe me, I had to do it, would be to cast an unfunny TV pilot for very little money, because that, for some reason, that's one of the lowest paying jobs. But I get this. And not only do I get it, I also have months to cast it, which I'll get to that in a minute, which I thought was great then, but now I realize I'd much better have a limited amount of time to cast, because people don't second guess themselves. So I read this and it's like, wow, I'm so lucky. And I got the job because they knew the people who wrote it knew my work from Bob Newhart. So that's how that happened. But I read it and okay, I know Andy Kaufman was, he was sort of a very easy one because of his character of Foreign Man. So that was, my first meeting with them, I said, "What about Andy Kaufman?" And they said, "Oh, that's who he wrote it for." I didn't know that. Okay, fine, one down. And then the next easiest part for me to cast was Louis. But I was told about Louis, don't spend too much time worrying about Louis. All we need is a funny looking guy. He's never going to have more than 1 or 2 lines an episode.
They were wrong about that one.
But I know from my television experience that you never know who's going to have 1 or 2 lines and who's going to dominate. I knew that. They didn't, or didn't realize it. So I literally brought in 2 people. And this story has been told before, where you never bring in one person, by the way, you always bring in two. So I brought in the first guy, read, and he read very well. And he was the opposite of Danny. He was very skinny and nerdy. But I bring in Danny, and he gets the part by doing this, taking the script and, who wrote this shit? That's exactly what Louis Wood did, and of course the guys are all the guys, because there were no women making decisions, and they're laughing, and he continues the discussions as Louis. All right, 2 down. One by one, all the characters were knocked off. We offered Judd Hirsch the part. He turned it down. Leave him on the side for a while. Tony Danza comes in it because he had done a pilot for ABC years ago. The original part was, by the way, that he had an Irish last name, and he was supposed to be a 40-ish washed-up boxer. And they thought, so this guy, a former ABC executive, said, we did a pilot with this guy. His name was Tony Danza, who actually is a boxer. You ought to see him. Bring in Tony for the part. They completely rewrite it. And they're right, because not only is he cute and funny, but he's no longer a tragic figure. He's a guy with aspirations. He's not washed up. He wants to do things. So I don't know how many we've gone down so far. Mary Lou.
Yeah, Mary Lou, I think you said you knew she was the right person for the job. God, she was such a babe on that show too.
Well, first of all, her character had so many different iterations. At one point, she was supposed to be black. That character was written for Nell Carter. But Nell Carter got taken away because she was doing 8 Misbehaving, and then Give Me a Break. So she was no longer available, but the character was so amorphous, it could be that it had to be a woman. But the reason I wanted Mary Lou was I had met her and knew her. I knew, in addition to being gorgeous and sexy and a good actress, Mary Lou could take shit from the guys and give it right back. Forget Me Too stuff and forget you're not supposed to do that. First of all, this was before that time, but even today, I would cast Mary Lou in that part, because you could use exactly the same dialogue, because if the guys are giving her shit, she gives it right back. Plus, she was gorgeous and could act. So to me, that was a no-brainer, but I did something that I will do upon occasion when necessary, because the guys had too much time. She wasn't exactly what they had first thought of for the part, and she was this, and she wasn't that, and she wasn't that. So I just lied. And I said, look, I don't want to lose her. And if we don't make her an offer today, she's going to disappear and we won't have her. And I don't have the backup. So I lied, and she got the part. They said, okay, pull it, set her, go do that. As it turned out, which I didn't know, Mary Lou actually she was going to get another offer from another show. So while I was lying, I was actually telling the truth, but I didn't know I was telling the truth. So let's go back to Judd for a minute.
Yeah.
Judd didn't want to do it because, not didn't want to do it, but yeah, he didn't want to do it because he was newly married, had a new family in New York, and he thought, well, Taxi, and it'll go for 6 months. I don't want to uproot my family and go to California for a job that's not going to last. So we kept going back and finally made him an offer that he couldn't refuse, meaning his salary. Mary Lou and what's his name, Danny, were getting in the range of $3,500 an episode to $4,000. Mm-hmm. Judd started at $35,000 an episode.
Oh man!
Nowadays, that's what you'd pay, but that was an extraordinary figure. But he held out and got his money. By the way, after the first year, when everybody renegotiates, Danny and Mary Lou and everybody else went up to their, to what they should have been paid. But the role of Bobby, the actor, was, here's a case where I was wrong. I wanted Jeff Conaway. I thought he'd be great in the part. Grease hadn't been released yet, but I thought Jeff was going to become a movie star. Grab him while you get him. He certainly is everything right for the part. At the day of his reading, Jim Brooks, who was really the elder statesman of the 5 writers, unbeknownst to me, brings in, Cleavon Little. Cleavon Little, wonderful black actor, Tony Award-winning actor for Broadway.
Star of Blazing Saddles for those who are
Yeah,
unfamiliar.
and for movies, Blazing Saddles, yes. And I realized, Jim is right. Jim is right. I'm glad he did this. I didn't know. But what happens is Jeff reads brilliantly and Cleavon reads terribly. And I became Norma Ray in favor of Jeff. So, but and with a little reinforcement of a little bump of Coke in the bathroom, because that's what you did at that time, just a little bit. And I became very eloquent, and Jeff got the part. But I realized, as I said earlier, years later, I was wrong. How can, and because I even said to the guys, how can you have an all-white taxi group in New York? And they always promised to add a black or a diverse, the word diverse didn't exist. They was going to add a black character later on, which they never did. So that was my Taxi story. And then of course Taxi gets done and I become this hero at Paramount. Paramount has made probably over $1 billion on my casting work. If you include Airplane, Cheers, Taxi, Airplane sequels, Grease sequels. And then, Paramount offered me a job and I became head of talent for Paramount. It didn't last very long, but that's how that happened. So I don't know. I went off topic.
It feels a little bit like a Sophie's Choice decision, trying to pick my favorite thing that you've done over the years, Joel. But if I'm being honest, it's probably Airplane. Airplane is it's one of those movies that since it came out, it has continued to amuse audiences, and younger generations are now exposed to this movie. I'm probably going to show my kids Airplane at some point in the next few years, and I'm sure they'll laugh as hard as I did the very first time. When you first read the Airplane script, were you laughing as loud as so many audiences over time have done since?
Not only was I laughing, I was embarrassed to go in because I was reading it over breakfast and laughing with spit takes all over the cover. The cover was no longer white. It didn't have a thick cover. It was actually just it started with like the second page, and it was like disgusting. But I laughed so hard in reading it. It's my sense of humor. But the reason why you're going to show it to your kids is that the three guys were geniuses. There's stuff in there that you don't even notice. But if you look carefully, there is nothing in there that indicates a 1970s time period. The clothing could be any period. They wanted it to be specifically not set in the 70s or any other era. And that's one of the reasons why it's going to go on forever and ever and ever, in addition to being, of course, extraordinarily funny. But they were very, very smart in everything they did. And for some reason, I knew when I read it that in order for the other, the male, the air control, all those other characters had to be straight. They had to be played straight by straight actors who were not known for comedy. Whereas Paramount, the studio's lists for those roles are hysterical, with even some ridiculous suggestion of what's his name?
Barry Manilow.
Barry Manilow for the lead, and Don DeLuise is this one, and all the old character actors.
What did they want Letterman to play?
The lead.
Okay.
The lead. He was that for it. And he auditioned actually, because that could have gone either way. Yeah. But he's not an actor. No. He's just not a good actor. By that time, I cast and produced a TV series that lasted for 2 years called Angie. So I knew Robert Hayes, and I knew that he had that kind of vacant thing about him that's just him naturally. And I didn't bring him in right away because Paramount wanted stars. And every single star in the universe, turned it down. Very few people actually got meaning understood the comedy in Airplane. But I did. And I had fun. They indulged me I said, you must put Peter Graves as the pilot, because that's my childhood story where I wanted Peter Graves from my father. I wanted to be that kid in the cockpit. Now, again, I've always been very open about my life, so who cares, But they got and they did. They cast Peter Graves, you know.
Oh, such a great character. He's like this borderline pedo, and Kareem is his co-pilot. I mean, you write about this in the book. Peter Graves had his reservations at first, but thankfully his family talked him into the role.
But that was not unique. Other people did too. I forget who, but some of the other, guys, Robert Stack, or those kind of people, also they didn't get it. But it was interesting. One of their agents, who was one of the oldest agents in the world, Gabby Greshler. In fact, he was so old that you called him the Gray Ghost. When he would come to your office, he literally his skin had a gray pallor. What was left of his hair was white. But Abby Gleshner knew that script was funny. So a couple of, I forget which of the clients were his, but he said, no, you're doing this. You may not get it, but you're doing it. So he was a big help.
Well, it's crazy that Kareem was third in line to play Captain Roger Murdoch, too. You had two other sports stars in mind first.
Well, it was, what's his name? My first one was, what do you call it? Well, they wanted Pete Rose, who wasn't available because of baseball. And I wanted, what's his name? What's her name?
Jenner, yeah.
Yeah, Bruce Jenner. And because he was on the Wheaties boxes and he was the most important athlete at that point. And he turned it down. And I joke about it, but not so jokingly, because he turned it down so he could do Alan Carr's movie, Can't Stop the Music. And maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but his costume in Can't Stop the Music were a pair of Daisy Dukes for the whole movie. So maybe that's why he did it. I don't know.
Perhaps a precursor. Now, I'm a child of the 1980s, Joel, so I only really know Leslie Nielsen as this slapstick actor. But even Leslie Nielsen in that movie, this is a guy who had essentially played rich white-collar villains up to this point in his career, but you casting him in Airplane essentially gives him a second life as an actor in Hollywood.
Well, what happened was we went through every single famous person who played a doctor on movies and television, and they all turned it down. From Jack Klugman to Richard Chamberlain, everyone to Ben Casey, everyone who had been that, and they all said no. And the boys, the Airplane boys, always wanted Leslie Nielsen. So he became our plan B when all those other people turned it down, because they had seen him on a late night talk show being very funny. I hadn't seen that, but they had. But when I got the clip, I knew exactly what they were talking about. So when everybody else turned it down, that's how Leslie Nielsen got that part. And in later subsequent interviews, he always said that he never understood why he was cast as all those white-collar villains. His natural mean and being is to be very funny. I guess it was because of the way he looked, and there weren't many comedy roles for people who looked like him. So maybe that was it. And, he and Peter Graves died within 2 weeks of each other a couple of years ago.
Yeah, boy, it is interesting to think about that. Maybe it's the fact that he has a fairly stoic look on his face at all times, even when he's saying and doing pretty outrageous stuff.
Yeah. Well, when you think of comedians, how many comedians are actually incredibly handsome? Seinfeld is Jewish cute. Chris Rock doesn't fit into any of them. Eddie Murphy was cute. Eddie Murphy was handsome, but very few of them are, because I guess comedy comes out of not being great looking. Self-deprecating. Joan Rivers, although I think she was pretty, but she didn't think she was pretty. So anyway, wherever it came from, it came from.
So you did briefly mention a few answers ago getting to work on Cheers, which maybe that is my number two. And this is in 1982 on NBC, which you're at NBC at this point, green lights Cheers. And you were in charge of casting for this, what turns out to be one of the all-time great TV shows. Why were Ted Danson and Shelley Long literally the first two names that you brought up when talking about casting the various characters?
Because I'm not stupid. Because first of all, Shelley Long, Helen Keller would have figured out Shelley Long if you looked at Shelley's work. her big thing was funny neuroses. In movies, she had played that. In person, she used to have a little bit of that. So Shelly was someone we agreed on from day one, everybody concerned. When it came to Ted, to Sam, it was a whole different story. While I was at Paramount, he played a fireman on an episode of Laverne and Shirley. I also had met him while I was the head of talent at Paramount. He did a pilot for us called Alice and Sidney Harrison. It was a dramatic pilot. Well, dramatic if you roll your eyes, about a father and daughter detective show, no less. And I got to know Ted at that point. You know, there was so many auditions and stuff. You get to know the guy and you see he has a sense of humor. He's affable. He's handsome. He's likable. So to me, it was, you know, that's why I thought of him. You know, and again, his comedy chops, I'd seen, you know, in addition to Laverne and Shirley, there was something else he did that was funny. So that's how I, you know, came up with it in the middle. I mean, at our first meeting. But I did tell them, but you're going to see everybody. But my intuition is this is who you're going to wind up with. So it came down to Ted Danson and another wonderful actor named William Devane. William Devane was exactly what they wrote in the script. Ted was not. Ted was younger. Ted was looked like he wouldn't have been a has-been. But I just, you know, my tendency is to think out of the box. So when I've always hired assistants, I hired assistants who think in the box. So when you combine the two, they work out. To get back on track, it came down to the two of them. And Grant Tinker had just come into NBC as the new boss. And he knew, and the writers who wrote this and the director, Jimmy Burrows, all started their careers at Grant Tinker's company. So he had a vested interest in being at the final auditions. He wanted William Devane, and I wanted Ted Danson. And after all going around the room, I decided to cut through all the muck. And, you know, I finally said, look, basically it comes down to more women in America are going to want to fuck Ted Danson than Bill Devane. And Grant Tinker, who is a very proper WASP, there's nothing wrong with proper WASP, but he would never curse. He would never, ever say anything like that. And here I am in a casting session, casually being vulgar. And Grant made like a gesture to clutch his pearls. But it worked. You know, it worked. And then when we went around the room again, the tide had shifted and everybody agreed on Ted. So, you know, that's why I got this quote on the back of my book. Thank you for everything in my life.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Not a bad blurb, you know. So anyway.
So another of the most famous of the 1980s shows that you were a part of is The Cosby Show, which NBC approves in 1984 with a plan to tape the pilot in short order. Less than 2 weeks after they greenlight The Cosby Show, which isn't a ton of time to get a cast together. Bill Cosby is a big part of this, as are you. I guess now is probably a pretty good time to admit to you, Joel, that Claire Huxtable was my very first television crush. So how did you settle on the woman who I knew as Felicia Rashad, but at the time was Felicia Ayers Allen as the Cosby's on-screen wife?
Well, one of my I had a very odd relationship with Nell Carter. It was just bizarre. You've read the book, so you understand it. But I was at a party that Nell was giving or had given for the cast of Dreamgirls that was then in LA, the musical Dreamgirls. And Felicia was understudying the lead. I think the lead, I forgot who the lead was, doesn't matter, but she was understudying the lead. So Nell comes up to me, grabs me. You got to meet Debbie's sister. I have no idea who she's talking about. And she introduces me to, this is Felicia. This is Debbie Allen's sister. So until she said Debbie Allen, I had no idea. And again, Felicia Ayers Allen. I think they shared the same mother, but different father, or whatever it was. They were sisters. And then leaves me to run off to attend to another guest at her party. And I'm seeing this woman who is like, whoa, you're not like Debbie at all. Debbie is boisterous and this, and you are this regal, elegant, beautiful woman. And we start talking, just conversation. And then Spanish-speaking server comes over, offering wine or whatever it was. And I was showing off, and instead of just saying thank you in Spanish, I added a little more. And then I said, oh God, I hope my Spanish was good. And she said, no, you were very good. And she said, I went to school in Mexico and I speak Spanish fluently. I mean, so that's how I learned she could speak Spanish. And we talked and this, and that was the end of that. A year later, Cosby is happening. And Cosby was very specific about who he wanted to play his wife, because he was casting his real life wife, who was very light-skinned, very beautiful, and was of Spanish origin, or I don't know what country, but she spoke Spanish, which eliminated like 3/4 of the people under consideration. I remembered this beautiful, elegant Black woman, Debbie Allen's sister, who spoke Spanish. So I told the casting director who was dealing, in order to do this in 2 weeks, I hired casting directors in New York and Chicago and LA. So you had 3 people working on it simultaneously. And everybody came from, the cast came from all 3 places. So the New York one, I said, look, I forgot her name. I don't remember her name, but she understudied in Dreamgirls in LA during this year. And she's Debbie Allen's sister. So they, put her on tape, and instantly they, flew her to LA, and she auditioned in my office. First of all, she was perfect, but her audition consisted of, she read with, what's his name? Michael, the son. I forgot his name. It just went out of my head. And instead of
Theo.
Yeah, the actor who played Theo, and she was bawling him out, and instead of going no with finger, she just stared him down. She went the complete opposite way that you think that everybody else went, and it was brilliant. And so she got the part.
She utilized that look so effectively throughout the course of the show too. And by the way, the ironic twist, I guess, on her getting the part is that she never had to speak a word.
She never had to speak a word. Well, also because it wasn't the way he had envisioned it, that she could be Ricky Ricardo with a string of Spanish stuff that Ricky did. But that would be totally inappropriate coming from Felicia. That's not her. Right. She would never do that. Somebody else might. Rita Moreno might do that, but not Felicia.
So I think you take the appropriate opportunity when talking about the Cosby Show to discuss some of what has happened with Bill Cosby, some of what he has been accused of and found guilty of over the last half decade plus now. And we're not going to talk about that right here. People are just going to have to buy the book to find out more about that. But in doing so, you transition into talking about the stereotype of the casting couch in Hollywood, and how you did know some people who exploited the casting couch for sexual means, but that was never your thing. And I think that is a component of what I feel like is your true character is somebody who is unapologetically who and what he is. You talk about being a gay man in Hollywood in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where people were terrified if they were gay to come out of the closet. And that wasn't ever you. You were who you were. And the same went with how you went about doing this job and trying to do things the right way. You talk about having to fire somebody a couple minutes ago. And while you did have to fire that person, you set them up with something that really helped them out immensely throughout the rest of their career. So I guess my question for you about that is, Joel, is why are you who and what you are? Why are you this person who doesn't seem all that interested in playing these feeble, these shallow games, and you would rather just do things in a way that you feel is morally and truthfully upright?
Well, let's start with just the casting couch itself. When it comes to sexual things, I'm not interested in the chase. Because casting couch it's not, in my opinion, it's not really a sexual thing. It's a power trip.
Yeah.
It's domination. It's power. I already had power. I didn't need to prove my power to anybody by doing something like that. And it's not when I say that was a funny line that I threw out, but I don't think I walk around thinking I'm all powerful. But if I was going to have sex with someone, it's because I want to have sex with them, not because I want to force them into doing it. That's not my scene. But I knew plenty of people who were not like that. So it never occurred to me. I'm not interested in the chase. If I was going to go into a gay bar looking for a mate for the night, my purpose in going into that gay bar was to get out of that gay bar as soon as I could, accompanied by someone else. You know, and I think that, you know, I don't know if straight people work the same way, but you know, going into, you know, an appropriate bar for that. But that was I'm interested in the deed. I'm not interested in chase. You know, so that was that. That was that.
As a member of the straight community, I guess I'll try and speak for everybody right now. We straights screw up that process so badly. Like you guys have Grindr, and we tried to do the same thing with Tinder, which within like 2 months turned into a dating app. It was no longer a hookup after like 2 or 3 months. So the
girls don't
try it too. They're not very good at it.
Girls don't do that. Gay guys do that. Gay guys hook up very easily. Straight women don't do that. And I don't know whether, I don't know why or where, and maybe because it was so difficult to meet people or to, you know, at a time for gay people to get together, that just, maybe this was herd mentality or something, whatever it is, but this is the way it worked. I think gay men are very, very good at having sex without emotion. Women are not. Women want emotion with their sex. Now, gay sex, you can have gay sex with emotion, but you don't have to. So I think there's, you know, that's my film philosophy on that. We don't have to go any further on that.
I would say you can have straight sex without emotion too, but then again, I come from the emotionalist side of being the guy in that equation.
Let's put it this way: it's harder. It's a little harder to do it on the heterosexual side. But
so have you always been wired your entire life to just be unabashedly you? And again, I say that as being a great thing because there are far too many people in the world who are putting up a charade or playing a game.
Without realizing it, yes. But I didn't know I was consciously doing this. Consciously, I knew working in the entertainment industry, I never had to be in the closet. So, and it was the only industry, once I realized there was an industry that I could work in, I always wanted to be a star. I always wanted to be a star and an actor. But then in college, I was doing a play, and I realized I'm a terrible actor. And I'm never going to be a star when it comes to acting. But then as I learned more and more about the business, I realized that I could be a star backstage. I could be a star in back of the camera or backstage, but not in front of the camera. And that's what I worked towards. So my goals were always towards that. And I think I did succeed. And in terms of always knowing who I was, I guess I did. I didn't know exactly how powerful I had become. I knew because of watching Ethel Winant, if we go back to her at CBS, how powerful she was. So part of me knew that when I took that NBC job, the job itself had the power. It wasn't necessarily me, it was the job. As proven, when I left the job at NBC, and all of a sudden my phone calls were not returned maybe as fast as they used to be. And it was even though I knew it could happen, I never thought that would happen to me, but it did. So, you know, but in terms of being myself, I never thought about it because who else could I be? You know, it's only recently when people ask you that question or the thing comes up, and I had no idea. I was me, and me was always great. I loved being me. I loved being the kid in class. I loved being the class clown. Especially when I had a playmate all through elementary school. Once I got kicked out of yeshiva, by the way, we haven't even talked about that. Yeshiva is Catholic school for Jews. and I got sent there for some misguided grandparents who thought I should do that. So I entered public school in the 4th grade. having skipped a grade or two because I had such a good education before I went to public school. But I was I was one of the two shortest and youngest kids in the class. And alphabetically, the other guy's name was Howard Topoff. So TH and TO, and size places, we were exactly together. And he was the perfect mischief playmate. And we were smart, so we didn't have to pay attention in class. We knew everything already. And, you know, we were sent to the principal's office with great regularity for fooling up, for fooling around, cutting up. And I always did that. I developed that personality. I'm going to use this book. I'll use this book because it's blank. This is NBC, our weekly conferences. Brandon Tartikoff is sitting at the head of the table, and Warren Littlefield, second in command, or Jeff Sagansky was sitting at the other end. Then everybody else is along the sides. I always sat at the corner. I sat over here next to Brandon. In my mind, that allowed me to interject whenever I wanted to, with something funny, with something, you know, meaningless, whatever it is, or to get a laugh. And Brandon allowed me to do that. You know, we just had this great relationship. I will tell you something, which, can you turn off the recorder for a second? Because I don't want it ever to get out, or you promise never to reveal it.
Hold on. Let me pause it real quick, and then the people will just have to wonder. You people just missed a really good story, but sorry, not safe for air. So it's just for my Joel's mind and those dinner parties that he hosts going forward, and probably some from the past too. All right, one more question, Joel, because near the end of this book, you write, "I wish I had do-over powers because there are many, many things that I would have done differently. If you could pick one thing to do over, what would it be and why?"
Well, it wouldn't be one thing; it would be an area. I only became aware. My last boyfriend was a black guy.
Okay.
And one day we went to the movies in LA. There's this very upscale black neighborhood called Baldwin Hills, and the movie we wanted to see was in the Baldwin Hills shopping center. And as we were walking through it, I'm the only white person. And I'm looking around and I say to him, I said, "Is this the way you feel? Is this the way it is?" He said, "All the time." Lesson that everybody should do. I mean, it's to walk a mile in someone else's shoes in a way. So if there's one thing to do over, two things. One, acknowledge the fact that I might not have always been right, that there is the extremely small possibility that I might be wrong once in a while. But the other one was to, in terms of my career, that one was, and the first one is really in general life. But in terms of my career, I wish I had been able to think more diversely and to cast with a much more open eye. I was not alone in this, by the way. That was basically it, to be able to look at a script and not think, oh, well, this particular black actor would be very good in this part, instead of automatically going to the white guy. Or the same thing for a brown guy or a yellow guy or whatever they are. But that would be it in terms of in terms of my career. I would have done that. Also, I would never have become a casting director. I would have become an agent.
Huh. Why?
Do you know the differential in salaries between agents and casting directors? Think of it as a minute. Sellers always make more money than buyers. And I had a cousin who was growing up in the industry, and advice, I said, go to work for an agency. And I got him a job with William Morris, because when you're at an agency, you have the overview of the entire industry in every facet of it: movies, television, personal appearances, music, gaming. But I never even knew about that at that time. So think if I had to do it over again. And by the way, an inventive agent, a clever agent, is also a casting director, because agencies put together packages. So anyway, but I won't get a chance to do it over.
Now, when you left NBC, I forget if it was the late 80s or early 90s. When you left NBC, was that it for you working as a casting director?
No,
Okay.
because I did subsequently cast, but I decided that I always talked about being a producer and wanting to produce. And so this was a time to do it. I got a brass parachute from NBC. It wasn't gold or platinum, it was brass. I got no on-air commitments. I got pilot commitments, but they were pilots, not on air.
Mm.
I think if I was a stronger personality, and I think that had to do with the fact that I always undersold myself. I was always underpaid as a casting director. I never got the kind of money that people who were head of development got. One of the reasons was I never gave a thought to money. I didn't have a family. You have a family. You have to think of that. I had a dog. I already owned a house. I had good real estate karma. I owned that house and I owned another house and I had a small apartment building, whatever. I sold the other house for the apartment building. But the point is, financially, I was fine. So I never thought of money. I should have. But I did not have great luck as a producer. I realized I'm not a salesman. Say I had a project. After the fourth no, I would not pursue it instead of waiting for the 24th no. So I realized what my skills were, and selling wasn't one of them. And I did a couple of things, during that 10-year period. And then at the end of it, shortly around the turn of the century, this century, I'd worked in reality television, and I liked that. I did a TV show called Pop Stars, which is like American Idol, but putting together a group. So I had fun doing that, and I managed to eke out a decent living during those 10 years. But then I said, okay, I'll go back to casting. So remember I said earlier about the most difficult thing to cast is an unfunny half hour?
Yeah.
So it was the end of pilot season, and it was a combination of Paramount, and by that time, Paramount owned half of something called UPN, another network. And I was given a project to cast called The Bad Girl's Guide, based on a book, The Bad Girl's Guide to the Universe. It was a tongue-in-cheek book about, I forgot the woman who wrote it, but it was a funny book. And there were 4 writers. They happened to be all women. And again, I can't stress how not funny it was. But I get it. Okay, well, this is my job. But fortunately, the lead character was a young character, a young woman in her early 20s who was supposed to be beautiful and funny and blah, blah, blah. Those people aren't exactly hanging around waiting for you to find them. But because she's so young, there's always a new 1 or 2 of them. So I took the job and I started casting it, and it was fine. I had a really nice assistant. I was enjoying myself. And one day this woman comes into the office and she's absolutely gorgeous. And she makes sense of the script. And I said, oh, can you do it again? Only do ABC. She reads it again and she takes my note. And I say, okay, here's the full script. Come back on Thursday and we're going to read these 2 scenes. She comes back on Thursday and she's much better. And I said, wow, not only is she beautiful, but her learning curve is like this. So I say, okay, we're going to read these same 2 scenes next week, and it'll be for the producers. Don't change anything. Don't suddenly try to improve. Just keep doing what you're doing. And even if these are little tips, and even if you've memorized it, hold the script. Looks like, so if they think you've memorized it, they'll think, well, that's the performance they're going to get. So, all these little tips I gave her. She comes in and she starts reading, and there's this long paragraph. And after she does this long paragraph, one of the women in the back says, thank you, which is, speak talk for, you're gone, you didn't get it, go outside. And I turn around and I said to the girl who was reading, I said, do me a favor, could you wait outside while we talk about you? Because they know they're talking about you, so why not say that? And I said, I'm guessing that you didn't like her. And they said, well, she wasn't funny, and she didn't make that she didn't read that paragraph funny. I had to bite my lip to say, the paragraph isn't funny. That's why she wasn't funny. But I didn't say that. What I did say was, look, we only had 2 weeks to go. We had no one set. And here, even not being in the business, you have to follow this logic. There's something called a test deal. Again, this woman was astoundingly beautiful. So I tried to remind her of someone who may not have been a great actress, but did very well in a comedy. Oh God, her name was in Three's Company. What's her name? Just went out of my head.
Suzanne Summers.
Suzanne Summers, hardly the greatest actress in the world.
Yeah.
But I said, remember Three's Company and Suzanne Summers? If these beautiful women are used well, it can work. Mm-hmm. So I suggest we make a test deal. A test deal obligates the performer, but it doesn't obligate the producer. You sign her to a test deal where they agree to a film test or a tape test or another reading, and you lay out how much money they'll get, how long the contract is. It lays out all the details, but it's all in favor of the producer. The talent has nothing to do with it. They don't get anything. So I said, well, look, honestly, we're 2 weeks. We don't have anybody. Let's make a test deal with her. It doesn't obligate us to hire her, but at least we can see, and you can direct her, and you could do this, and you can do that. And they said, well, no, she's never going to get this. She's not funny. We know she's not funny. She didn't do this. She didn't do that. And I tried again. Well, but what have you got to lose? We have nobody. If nothing else, she's just so beautiful. Nope, we don't want to do this. So I said goodbye to the actress, whose name I don't remember, by the way. And then I turned to the women. I said, look, it's obvious you don't need me because you know everything. So don't send me the second payment. Here's my casting book, and good luck. And I walked out. And I walked out of the studio. I walked out. As I was walking to my car, 17 messages. What did you do? What did you do? And I said, I quit. And the good bumper of this story was 2 weeks later, those 4 women were fired. And they brought in another writer who managed to salvage the property some way. And the way these things work out, either CBS or Paramount had a deal with Jenny McCarthy. So they raised the character's age, rewrote it slightly. And Jenny McCarthy did 6 episodes of this, which aired, and that was the end of it. But I quit. You don't need me. You were fucking idiots here. You know, you're hiring me for my expertise and you're not listening to anything, even when it makes sense. I'm not saying hire her. I'm saying make a test deal. So that was when I quit. That's when I stopped casting.
For somebody who has the skins on the wall that you do too, by the way, you think that somebody would be smart enough to listen to someone who has proven themselves over and over again throughout different eras of television. And the idea that you were proposing wasn't even some huge gamble. It was a very low risk idea.
Yes, it was no risk. It wasn't even low risk. It was no risk.
A no risk idea. But I am glad to hear that you did get to leave that profession on your own terms, just like you've gotten to live your life now too. And I cannot recommend this book enough. He is Joel Thurm. The new book is Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season: Confessions of a Casting Director. Get it now on Amazon. That's where I bought this book. Joel, thank you so much for the time today, and thank you for sharing your story. I
will, shameless plug, it's #1 on Amazon in its category of movies and movie biographies.
I love it. Never know, maybe there'll be a film or like a Netflix series adaptation of this book before it's all
there are several things that could be done with this book, and I hope somebody does something with it.
Me too. Hope this is the last time, Joel. Thank you so much for the time today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks to Gentleman Jesus for the intro and outro music. Hear more of his work at gentlemanjesus.com. And thanks to you for tuning in. For more of the show and to connect on social media, visit booksonpod.com. We'll talk to you next time on Books on Pod.